Good news?
Yes.
I don't know. Recently. Yesterday, maybe.
Today when I got told I'd get 20 quid for an hour.
My best friend's having a baby girl.
No, I don't have any. You go first. No, you've got good news.
Baby slept through the night.
I think it was my GCSE results.
I found out I was getting a sort of a better job, I guess.
It was my brother getting into university.
I'm quite loud, so I'll just shout it to everyone.
Twitter, Facebook, stuff like that really.
With my friends, it's usually food.
Oh my God, guess what? You know?
Like I just tweet most of my stuff.
Jumping up and down.
I tell them face to face. I don't do like Facebook or all that sort of stuff, so.
Is it good news if you can't tell anyone, really?
I suppose all good news is worth sharing.
To make everybody else happy.
So people can celebrate with you, right?
Have you told anybody what you've been getting up to on a Wednesday night? There was a guy who, when asked by his group host, what have you been telling people you've been doing on a Wednesday night? He said, I've been telling them I'm learning French. I don't know where you are along the journey. You might be thinking, I'm not sure what I believe yet. Or you might be thinking something along the lines of, actually, I've had something of an encounter. Maybe it was at the weekend away and something is stirring in you. But if somebody were to ask you, how would you explain it? How would you share that with them? I was born in Nigeria, and I moved here at the age of 7 with my mother and sister. We moved to London. But it wasn't a smooth transition. It wasn't particularly easy. We went from stability to the worst kind of instability. Moving every couple of months, not having a home in the way that I knew or was used to at all. It led to a very complex, complicated relationship with my father back home in Nigeria. And then to top it off, I had the thickest Nigerian accent. You probably wouldn't believe it now, but it was pretty heavy. And so throughout primary school, I was bullied. I did not have a good primary school experience at all. I then went on to go to a different secondary school, of course, and had a much, much better, much different experience. I made friends there, friends that are really like sisters, people that I still have on speed dial even now. And it was a Christian girls' school, so what we would do at the end of the day is we'd run into the bathrooms downstairs. You had to run because you wanted to make sure you got the good mirror with the good lighting. And we'd hitch up our skirts. So actually, they weren't even really skirts. They were these big kilts. So we'd hitch them up, use our money belt to cinch them in, use our jumper to cover it up, apply on loads of makeup, put on heels. I still can't get over why it makes sense to wear heels in your uniform. And then we'd casually stroll by the local boys' school on our way home. And that's the kind of stuff we got up to. That is if I wasn't bunking off school to see my much older boyfriend. So I had a great experience at school. And it being a Christian school and having grown up in a Christian family, it was to a degree acceptable to talk about faith. But it wasn't something I ever found easy because I was scared of how people would judge me, of people thinking differently of me, of people thinking, oh, you actually believe that? So I rarely shared, I rarely talked about my faith. And you might be thinking, well, actually, that sounds like a pretty good Christian, the kind of Christian who just does it by how they live. But doesn't really talk too much about it. You might be thinking of somebody somebody in your family. And it's sometimes called the Uncle Norman factor. Good old Uncle Norman, he's a fantastic Christian. He never tells anyone about it, though. He doesn't talk about it. But my question to you is this: how did Uncle Norman become a Christian? How did he hear about it? Somebody must have had to have told him. So why should we tell others? Well, firstly, because Jesus asks us to. The Bible tells us to go. It says go 1,514 times in the Bible. Go and tell others. Go and tell people about me. I came that not only would they have life, but that they would have life abundantly. The Bible tells us to do so. And secondly, because of our response to humanity. because of the needs of people, like hunger. If you're in a desert and you come across an oasis, you're going to tell the people you care about it. How much more so when it's Jesus, who not only satisfies our hunger and thirst, but the deeper hunger and thirst of meaning and purpose and fulfillment. And Sinead O'Connor, the singer, she said this once. She said, "As a race, we feel empty because our spirituality has been wiped out and we don't know how to express ourselves. And as a result, we're encouraged to fill that gap with alcohol, with drugs, with sex, with money. People out there are screaming for the truth." So we do it for the love of people. We do it because it's good news, and we do it because good news travels fast. As Toby said, my background is working in fashion. I've worked in fashion as a creative consultant, and most recently in the health and well-being sector, launching a lifestyle and wellness consultancy. And the way that has looked has been, this year I decided to kick that off by launching a series of workshops, a series of events that people could buy tickets for. So I started doing all the things you need to do behind the scenes, and I put it up on the website, but I hadn't told anybody yet. I hadn't sort of put it out on social media. I hadn't really told many people at all. And one Friday afternoon, I was doing that thing, just fidgeting while behind the scenes of the website where I saw a transaction under the events section. I thought, okay, well, I didn't buy a ticket. My friend Gozi didn't buy a ticket. And I looked at the name, I was like, I don't even recognize the name. My mom didn't buy the ticket. So not only had somebody else found out about this event, they'd gone ahead to go and buy the ticket before I told anyone. And I couldn't believe it. I thought, oh my God, this is amazing. I actually have to do it now, though. And so the next day, I told people straight away. But even the next day, I then jumped onto Facebook and I did like a video, and I was like, oh my God, guys, this amazing thing happened. Please help me share it. And they did, and people shared it on social media. They told their friends, and that's the thing about good news, about great news. It travels fast. People want to share that news as much as you do. And when people encounter Jesus, it can be very much the same. They're excited about this new thing that they have found, and they want to share it. But sometimes it can be insensitive. Sometimes we can be insensitive. I was on the train home last week, Thursday, and there was this guy who was really excited about sharing his faith. Now, really, really, really excited about sharing his faith. So much so that I could hear it even through my headphones. So he was walking all up and down the carriage, sort of speaking emphatically, and just telling people about this stuff. And part of me thought, oh my God, that's incredible. You have so much courage. But part of me thought, yeah, but it's a little insensitive. I could see that not everybody else on the train was as excited as he was. And if you know anything about public transport in London, you don't talk to anyone. You don't make eye contact. You don't smile. You give people personal space. Not everybody has that memo yet, but it is a memo. And here was this guy making such a big thing about his faith because he was excited to share it. But the thing is, sometimes we can be insensitive. I know I've been that. Moments in my life when I've said the wrong thing. And I haven't been the most loving or caring person in the way I've gone about things. And because of that insensitivity, people get hurt. And not only do people get hurt, but people also misunderstand us. But the thing is, I then moved from insensitivity to fear of judgment. I'm an avid reader. I always have my nose in a book or my podcast in my ears. I'm always consuming content somehow. And you can normally find me cozied up in the corner of a cafe or a bookshop. But this funny thing tends to happen whenever I'm reading a Christian book or a book that has even a remotely religious title. One of two things. Either somebody walks past and I just casually tip the book forward so they can't quite see what it says. Or I'm on the tube and I just happen to take the book out, but without the cover sleeve, yeah? Because I don't really want you to know what I'm reading. And that's me acting from a place of fear, if I'm being honest. But the thing is, I think, how can someone like myself, someone who is an introvert and who would much rather be sat where you are right now than stood up here, how can someone like me still communicate and share their faith? And I think it boils down to this one thing, and that one thing is love. It's love at the end of the day. And there are various ways of doing this, but there are 5 in particular I thought we'd look at tonight that begin with P, so it's a bit easier to remember. And the first is presence. And that's not presence, Christmas tree, it's presence, as in being there, as in being out in the world with people. In Matthew 5:13, Jesus says, "You are the salt of the earth, you are the light of the world. Let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and praise your Father in heaven." So if you want to make a difference in the world, be like salt. Salt adds flavor to things. It makes things taste even better. And in the ancient days, in the old times, salt was used as a preservative to stop things going bad. And that's exactly what Jesus is saying here, that we should be like salt in order to stop society going bad. And that we are the light that is going to light up a dark room. Martin Luther King said, "Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that." And that's what Jesus wants for us. That's what Jesus wants us to be in our workplaces, with our friends, in our community, in our family. And you can do that just by leading the life you do, being a person of integrity, being your authentic self, caring about people, because you already do. And his word says, by your good deeds, people will see your good deeds. So it's how we respond to hunger, it's how we respond to homelessness and poverty and the injustices of the world. William Wilberforce, at the age of 27, looked at society around him during the 18th century and saw this evil we call slavery. And he saw the inhumaneness of it and the degradation of it. But not everybody thought the same. In fact, at the time, it was thought of as a good thing for the economy. So no, people didn't want to abolish slavery. But William took it upon himself and decided to become a member of Parliament so that he could pass bills in Parliament to abolish slavery. He tried for years and years and years and years to no avail. But he was passionate and he was driven by his faith in Jesus Christ. And in his own words, he said, that the Almighty would give me success. And God did, but it took him 45 years. In 1833, the Abolishment of Slavery Act was passed in Parliament. 3 days later, William died. So he got to see this great vision come to pass, and he was buried at Westminster Abbey in recognition of the work he did to free African slaves. But what about today? What about the injustices that we see here and now today? Over 1 billion people live on less than $1 a day. If you and I were to live on just bread and water for the rest of our lives, we would still be far better off than the majority of people. Every 4 seconds, a child dies from poverty. And last year alone, 1.5 million people died as a result of AIDS-related diseases. There's still injustice. There's still so much to be done. And not just that, but actual slavery has come back. Modern day slavery is far greater than it was in the 18th century. And every 3 seconds, somebody falls victim to human trafficking. There's still injustice. Now, you might be sat there thinking, okay, but that sounds like so much. Where do I start? What can one person do? There was a man who was walking along a beach in Mexico, and he turned a corner. And as he turned a corner, he saw on the beach tens of thousands of starfish just out on the sand. The tide had receded, so they were left out on the sand, but without oxygen and essentially dying. And as he looked out, he saw a boy in the far corner who would pick up one starfish. He'd walk down to the waterfront, and then he'd throw the fish back out into the sea. And so the guy goes up to the boy and says, well, what's the point? What difference is that going to make? There's tens of thousands of starfish here. And the boy turns to him and says, well, it made a difference to that one. And that's all we can do, is to make a difference to one person. Nelson Mandela said this. He said, it's not the kings and the generals who make history, but the masses of the people. And that's us, that's you and I. And that's the first P, presence. The second P is persuasion. So not pressure. I'm the very first person to run a mile. If you try to make me do something I do not want to, I'm just not interested. I'll be quite frank. And this is what Apostle Paul says. We try and persuade people because this is wonderful. It's such good news. We want everyone to know about Jesus, about his life and his death and the resurrection. And by reasoning and explaining, we can share this faith. But it isn't about blind faith. There's reasoning behind it. We can give people a reason to believe. 1 Peter 3:15, Apostle Peter says this. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason, i.e., it's not irrational, to give the reason for the hope that you have, but do this with gentleness and do this with respect. And so gentleness is the opposite of arrogance, and respect is because every single person is a child of God and deserves just that. You might be thinking, sort of when you came and joined your Alpha small group, the Alpha hosts, he or she or both, were always saying, okay, so what do you think? And how do you feel about that? And you might be thinking, you probably thought at some point, yeah, but what do you think? When are you going to say something? And the truth is, people need to be listened to. That's the most important thing. It's the greatest sign of respect, is to be listened to. And that's one of the reasons I personally have loved being involved in Alpha so much. It's the variety of people and experience that you get to come across, and genuinely interesting stories and experiences. But Paul also says, be ready to give an answer to those who ask you. So what happens when somebody asks you a question and you don't know? Well, that's the thing, it's fine. I don't know. And that's okay to say, to admit. To say, do you know what, I don't know, but maybe I'll do a bit of reading and I'll come back to you with more of an answer. There's a book by Nikki Gumbel, Searching Issues, which explores some of the biggest questions. You know, I don't know, why does God allow suffering? I don't know if I can balance Christianity and spirituality. How does it work? But it's worthwhile reading a book, either that one or one that is similar, so that when somebody does ask you, you can say to them, okay, but have you thought about it from this angle? When the Titanic was sinking, the unsinkable ship, they were trying to get people out onto the lifeboats to leave. But people didn't want to. They were trying to persuade people to get into the lifeboats. But the first couple lifeboats actually left still half empty. Now, they were trying to persuade people, not just out of fear, but out of love for their own safety. And that's what we're trying to do here. We're trying to persuade people out of love. We're trying to share something that is good. The third P is proclamation. So that's what we're doing here on Alpha, communicating the message of Jesus Christ. And there are a number of ways you can do this, but particularly in the New Testament, it was very much about come and see. That's what Jesus did. He said, come and see. And whenever people came and followed him and had their own experience, had their own encounter, they would then say to their friends, okay, come and see for yourself. And that might be why some of you are here tonight, because a friend or a colleague or a member of your family said to you, check out Alpha, come and see. In the beginning of John's gospel, we read about a disciple called Andrew. And in 1 John, or rather John 1, 41 to 42, the Apostle Peter says this. He says, Simon Peter, I found Messiah, that is Jesus. And so he takes his brother Peter to meet Jesus. The former Archbishop of Canterbury, William Temple, said that the greatest service one person can render another is to bring them to Jesus. And that's what Andrew was doing here with his brother. He said, brother Simon Peter, come check this dude out. And that's what we can do. We can't all be Peter, but we can all be Andrews. And that's why we share our faith. There's a story of this guy called Albert McMakin. Albert began a relationship with Christ. He discovered a faith, and he decided he wanted to share that with his friends. So he'd heard of an event that was going on. It was over a couple of days, and he wanted to invite his friends along. So he did. But there was this one friend in particular, he really wanted to go, but this guy he wasn't feeling it. He was not very interested at all. He had girlfriends everywhere, a good-looking guy, but he was just not interested. So Albert thought to himself, okay, how can I convince him to come? I know, I'll get him to drive the van. That way he has to be there. So he asked his friend to drive the van, and his friend said, okay, cool, that's fine. I'll drive, but I'm not going to go into the event. I'm not going to go. So no, they did. They got to the event, they got to the venue, and his friend stayed outside, but was intrigued, and he heard what was going on, and so decided, okay, I'll just go in and I'll stand at the back. But he was pulled in. There was something about it that he couldn't resist. And so the first night he went in, the second night he went in, the third night he went in. And on the last night, the speaker stood at the front and said, if there's anybody who wants to give their life to Christ, come forward now. And Albert's friend did. Albert's friend went on to speak to over 210 million people about his Christian faith. He was a friend and a confidant to over 9 US presidents, and through television spoke to over half of the world's population. Albert's friend was called Billy Graham. You may or may not have heard about him. Again, we can't all be Billy Graham, but we can be Albert McMakin, and we can say to our friends, come and see, come check it out. And then there's the power of your own story. You may already have a story whilst you've been here on the course, something you experienced on the weekend away, or maybe even tonight. But that's the thing about your own story. It has such power, because when you share your experience, nobody can challenge that. Nobody can say to you, yeah, but no, that didn't happen, because it was your experience. It was your story. And that's the power of what you have to share with someone you know and someone you love. Like the blind man, when he was healed by Jesus, the Pharisees were challenging him and asking him questions about Jesus and why. And he said to them, look, I don't know, but I was blind and now I see. And you can't argue with that. The fourth point is power. 1 Thessalonians 1 verse 5 says this. Our gospel came to you not simply with words, but also with power, with the Holy Spirit, and with deep conviction. And that's what I've loved, again, about being involved in Alpha over the years. It's that experience of the Holy Spirit and the encounter that you can have doing this. And I think next week you're going to look at the topic of healing and the role the Holy Spirit has to play in that experience of real, true, life-transforming power. Or maybe you had that already at the weekend, but that is what the good news is. It's power. And finally, the fifth P is prayer, and that's praying for others. In Romans 10, verse 1, Apostle Paul again says this. He says, my heart's desire and prayer to God is that they might be saved. I think of a guy called Rick. When he became a Christian, he didn't have very many Christian friends at all. In fact, he just had this one Christian friend. So he called up his friend and Rick said to him, look, I've become a Christian. And his friend said back, incredible, I have been praying every single day for 4 years that you would become a Christian. And Rick was astounded. He was astounded and said, okay, there's something to this prayer thing. So then he started praying for his friend Tim. 10 days later, Tim became a Christian. There is power, such incredible, immense power in prayer. So I want to encourage you to not give up, to keep praying, because the message we have to share is incredible, and it's life-changing, and it is transformative. During the World War II, there was a soldier who had been shot and was dying in the trenches. And a friend of his came up to him and said, look, what can I do for you? How can I help? And he said, look, I'm dying. There's nothing you can do. But there is this one message you can take back home for me. And his friend said, yes, of course, anything. And he said, okay, go to this man at this address and tell him this. Tell him that what he taught me as a child is what is helping me die right now. And so this other soldier, when he got back to Britain, did exactly that. He went and found this man at this address. And actually, this man was a Sunday school teacher. And he told him exactly what had happened with the dying man. And the Sunday school teacher said to himself, oh my, I gave up teaching a couple of years ago because I didn't believe what I was doing was having any effect anymore. I didn't believe it mattered. And that's my encouragement to you. What you're doing, how you're sharing, it matters, and it changes lives, whether we see it or not always straight away. And then there was Jane who, she brought someone onto Alpha a couple of terms ago. She brought a friend of hers to Alpha. And somebody said to her, Jane, it's incredible, the difference I've seen in your friend. It literally has been life-changing for her. And Jane said, if there's one thing that I've done right, if my life has been worthwhile, it's because of that. It's because of what I've been doing. It's because of that. So I want to encourage you to tell someone.